So one of the things that we will go through today is just a brief overview of the Pulse of the Industry report, just to really set a stage for the ongoing symposium that we have today. There's a number of slides. We'll get through them. In some ways, you might think that I'm an economist because I have too many slides and I don't spend enough time on them. I apologize for that now, and we'll try to give you as much time as what we can. So the first thing that we're going to do is just deal with some of the overall headlines that impact the industry. Now, the Medtech report that was issued, which is the 2010 report, is really based on activity that happened in 2009 and the early part of 2010. The 2011 report will come out a little bit later this year, so some of the information is dated. However, I think it's still pretty relevant for what we're talking about. So these were some of the headlines that we dealt with over the last year. And the key is that revenues remained flat. While the global industry fared better than most industries, it's still not reflected on the top line with a relatively flat income on a year-over-year basis. Most of the increase for public medtechs actually came in Europe, with a very small increase with North America recording declines as opposed to any increases at all. Net income, however, really did improve very, very well, with a nearly 11% increase from 2008. And this was primarily a result of a focus on financial discipline to improve bottom line performance and reductions in one-time charges and discretionary expenses. Europe increased actually by 29%, with just over 4% here in North America. The medtech world was evolving, and the participants were focused internally for a period of time, focused on their own processes of developing new products and new ways of manufacturing their products, because they were key to their survival, especially coming out of the 2008 year. Debt, however, has increased substantially in 2009 and 2010, so that market actually was active, but it was largely driven by just a few very large transactions that saw the growth on a year-over-year basis. VC funding, which is the lifeblood of many of the industries, continued to flow in the sector at a relatively strong pace in 2009 and 10, down from 2008, but up from the pre-2005 period. However, the investment target has shifted to increasingly target later stage companies where the risk is reduced. All of this, of course, is at the expense of the emerging companies where they really do need that funding to take their idea from germination to production. IPOs were scarce, with only one both in North America and the US through all of 2009, and one in each jurisdiction as well in 2010 thus far. M&A activity was also down, but is producing a slight rebound in 2010, but again, very, very delayed, very much showing and waiting for much of the risk to be taken out of that market. So one of the things is the medtech industry is a confluence of trends. Sorry, sometimes when you press this too fast, it goes. But consistent with the evidence that the industry is facing really an unprecedented confluence of challenges that promise to test many of the basic elements of the industry's long-standing business model in ways not seen in the past. And this includes funding sources, innovative tech mechanisms, deal structures, regulatory regimes, and payer expectations. And we will focus on the last one because payer expectations is something that's very relevant for the industry. The implications overall will be significant. Medtechs will need to revisit key elements of their business models, from how they raise capital to how they innovate to even question what they sell. So it creates really three fundamental challenges, and those are the sustaining innovation, delivering value and outcomes, and fueling growth. Since medtech is such a diverse industry, the trends we discuss here, like sweeping changes in any industry, will inevitably produce winners and losers. But out of these new risks come, of course, new opportunities. The challenge for medtech companies in different segments will be to position themselves to seize these emerging opportunities. The paths taken to do so will be as creative and, of course, as variable as the industry itself. So let's explore a bit of each of these challenges, starting with the sustaining innovation. Medtech is typically classified as part of the life sciences, but is often has more in common with the information technology companies rather than the biotech and pharma. As you can see in the chart, there's a number of indicators that really gain a whole lot of reliance or a whole lot of similarity between the IT industry and Medtech, especially that dealing with product development cycle and regulatory framework. This distinction is particularly relevant today as Medtech's innovation model is coming under unprecedented strain from trends in the capital markets, in the deal space, and the regulatory front. So the long-standing cycle of innovation, as noted in the previous chart, is changing. So this represents where it is and where it has traditionally been. So the biopharma innovation, as we saw, was more linear in shape, whereas the medtech is more cyclical and an iterative process. It tends to focus largely on physicians as a starting point and a reflection point. This is changing, as we will see through the presentation. Technology moves through development and commercialization in early stage companies, and the more traditional exit plans involve a sale to a larger enterprise. Now, of course, this innovation cycle is under strain. So it faces new challenges in the form of venture funding. So even though capital is constrained, funds are still available, but the distribution has been skewed towards the later stage companies. VCs are having to carry portfolio companies longer, meaning there's less money, of course, for the new investments. R&D, there's less access to capital to fund. Process of obtaining market approval is becoming more challenging with new regulatory restrictions being introduced, and of course, new taxes. Exits from acquisitions, buyers are more risk averse and requiring companies to commercialize their operations, adding time and cost to exit. And of course, that represents an inefficient use of a scarce capital as companies in the early stage are looking to expand and use as much capital as they can. And of course, the iterative innovation with physicians, some worry about the connection and of course, the subsequent innovation between the company and doctors will be hurt because of the clarity and the ultimate reporting. And in the US, the Sunshine Act has had an impact on that. And of course, there's the continuing business concerns, which is the time to profitable results and necessity of ongoing improvements to maintain relevance in the industry. The second challenge deals with the delivering of value and outcomes. Of course, there's increased scrutiny is coming to the medtech. Even as medtechs grapple with the challenges of sustaining and funding innovation, they face a future in which the fruits of that innovation will be under more scrutiny than ever before. This challenge is, of course, being driven by the three trends noted above. Consolidation of purchasing decisions by hospitals, which really has fewer suppliers in each product category, and increased responsibility to show superiority of their products. Comparative effectiveness research, where the ultimate consumer need to understand how your product stands up to efficiency and effectiveness against other alternatives, whether there's direct competition, either directly against that product or with multiple vendors on the other side. It's clearly the value for money concept. And possible regulatory changes, the bar continues to change to bring products to market. Regulatory agencies are trying to find that right balance in the ever-changing environment that it's in. The focus is being driven from a more knowledgeable and educated consumer who has wider resources at their fingertips to evaluate effectiveness and overall health outcomes. Therefore, increasing the focus on getting parameters of your product is an absolute. Therefore, growing requests for comparative effectiveness research, increased scrutiny and pressure from hospitals, and higher regulatory hurdles are more than just a coincidence. They are actually symptoms of a fundamental shift to the emergence of a new health outcomes ecosystem. With a change in focus to health outcomes, it changes the way medtech companies need to look at the market and its opportunities. Companies will no longer be rewarded based upon how many units they sell, but rather how effective those products are in improving the health of patients. And not only there are new drivers, but there are new entrants into the ecosystem as well. Both are being propelled by several trends: the increased adoption of the electronic health records, healthcare reform measures, especially in the US, Europe, and China, and a new focus on the consumers. In other words, the patients are empowered by technology, and that's either through the PDAs, the social media networks, and other forms. It's not just medtechs being impacted. It's also biopharma, providers, and other non-traditional entrants like IT firms, retailers, insurers, etc. In fact, the investment by these non-traditional entrants is outpacing the traditional players, and by significant amounts. The balance of power is shifted away from the physicians, only to now include empowered patients that have access to increasing amounts of information. Of course, the potential is truly tremendous. The health outcomes ecosystem would seemingly be in medtech's sweet spot, as it lies at the intersection of healthcare and information technology. The currency of health outcomes is information, capturing, measuring, sharing, and monetizing it, which will require innovative new technologies. There should be many opportunities presenting themselves in the future when this is grasped and forms a movement forward in the industry. In order to capitalize on these opportunities, medtechs will need to find new ways of doing business and executing transactions. And the real opportunities may be to experiment through pilots and to partner, including those with non-traditional partners. On the left is, of course, a simple traditional focus, almost linear, of the relationship in the deal market for medtechs. This has now evolved into its own ecosystem with a number of players and complexity growing at its own speed, providing new opportunities but also new risks. As an industry whose deal space has traditionally focused on mergers and acquisitions, medtechs would be smart to add strategic alliances to the mix, especially with non-traditional players. Examples, of course, are already emerging. You have LifeScan, where they're linked in with an iPhone app, or the Bear Diabetes Care, which involves children playing with a Nintendo toy in order to, at the same time, measure glucose level through a glucometer. These are some of the opportunities that are already emerging. And you can see that the crossover between medtech and IT, entertainment, and social media is on the move. Your innovation umbrella needs to widen to search, of course, for new ideas. And similar to what Deb said earlier, Southwest Ontario, and London in particular, is ideally situated with access to these industries to provide the opportunity for such a cross-pollination. Eventually, your health outcomes ecosystem could look like this. The center part clearly focuses on the slowly widening group of traditional players to now engaging many non-traditional players that are listed around the outside. This is happening now and growing rapidly. The third challenge is fueling growth. While medtech has fared better than most industries through the current economic downturn, the real challenge for the industry is to fuel long-term growth, but with the aforementioned host of challenges, where will growth come from? We really believe one word offers a solution, which is diversification. So with always a focus remaining on the emphasis of the health outcomes, because that is the key indicator moving forward, product diversification is one of those areas of diversification. And really, medtech is best positioned to serve many of the features in the new ecosystem. As you can see in the chart, there's a number of ways to analyze this, from looking at the needs of boosting impact of existing therapeutics, developing targeted therapeutics, and better managing chronic diseases as examples of where to do it, and of course the opportunities then for medtech to expand and grow their own practice areas. Second area of diversification is geographic. So really the focus is on looking to emerging markets. As you look at whittling down innovation, it essentially takes those products that are already in play in more mature markets, stripping out some of the factors that are not necessary and introducing them into emerging market as a new product. At the same point, you have the trickle-up innovation, or called the second wave, of as you've had that product in play in one of the emerging markets, it again all of a sudden accumulates an increasing interest to again introduce it back into the more mature marketplaces. But certainly looking for new areas on a geographic basis to expand is absolutely key for success. And the third is the growth through offer diversification. And this is really the opportunity to work to build out your service capabilities and provision of solutions, not only with people inside the medtech industry, but also with non-traditional players at the same time. And this can evolve from sharing supply chain benefits all the way down through to partnering for shared market access. It creates or forces a creativity in order to determine how you can best play with those non-traditional players in order to achieve success and grow out the market space. So where do you go from here? Really, there's perhaps 4 guiding principles to look to. The first is to demonstrate value proactively. Make sure that you're looking internally at your own products. You're evaluating honestly the risks that are inherent, determining whether you should continue with those products or move forward with more innovative, or whether there should be slight tweaks or improvements to those processes. Defining appropriate value measures, building processes to capture that key data, because that will create relevance for you as you deal with non-traditional players. And of course, increasing the product attractiveness, because the physicians are no longer the key source of the product, but rather it's the patients and the growing knowledge of that patient's group. The collaborating, increasing reliance on those strategic alliances, as we talked about before, and mostly with non-traditional players, because that is the evolution of the industry. And it's developing specialized functional capabilities and skill sets. You do want to create your relevance and why those non-traditional players will want to deal with a medtech operation. The innovation, we've talked a little bit about the whittle down and the trickle up innovation, but there's also the concept of pick your size innovation. You don't need to be all things to all people. It may be that you look to specialize in particular areas and or only grow to a particular size that you know you control, manage, and can control those risks that will succeed. And the last is preserving the ecosystem. As we talked about, the funding is becoming more and more constrained over those years. But there's a critical element that new investment has to happen. That's where the new ideas are coming from. The emerging companies need and require that source of funding. VC capital is not always there in order to finance it, so finding critical ways to continue to feed the ecosystem in order that it's going to maintain its success moving forward. And there's some inventive ways that are being considered in terms of emerging companies being financed by larger companies, looking at setting up partnerships and evolving that just to provide financing into those market areas. So if this was all in the way that we're doing it, it could potentially lead to an ecosystem that looks something like this. And this was a graphic that actually Microsoft created, showing how the new health ecosystem could evolve and the key players in that transformation, whereby the application programming interface will play the central role in communicating data. So again, moving one step further from just the patients being the key, but rather the information is the key in driving where the healthcare industry is moving in the future. Now, this is an interesting IT-driven answer, not surprising given it comes from Microsoft, but it's interesting to view how the healthcare system and its response to the healthcare system will or could evolve in the future with the entrance of many non-traditional players into the space. I'll leave you with this last thought. If you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. But it will take work and creativity to identify the change and move forward. So with that, good luck and thank you for your time this morning.